All right, so today I'm pleased to introduce our speaker, Jenna Baljunas. Jenna is from Pennsylvania and graduated from Chatham from that place in 2023 with a BS in environmental science and a minor in botany. As an undergraduate, she conducted research on a variety of ecological questions and ecosystems, including ecohydrology research in Costa Rica, and more locally in Pennsylvania. Her research spans seed dispersal to avian surveying to geospatial analyses. She already has 2 peer-reviewed papers published from these projects, one of which she's first author on, and to top it off, she's also president of her campus Society for Ecological Restoration. So Jenna arrived at Archbold last September, just in time to experience 2 hurricanes. She's been a wonderful part of our plant ecology team, who's quick to learn the plants out here and capable of doing just about every kind of project we could throw at her. Her independent project that she'll be sharing with you all today is one of the most ambitious intern projects that I've advised. And as you'll see, the work gets at this fundamental mechanism of how plant population dynamics respond to fire by investigating how seed predation pressure changes through time. So I don't want to give away too much in the introduction, but her experimental setup was enormous, spanning 9 sites varying in their time since fire, 5 plant species, several seed predator manipulations, and requiring counting out tens of thousands of seeds twice, both at the beginning and the end of her experiment. So Jenna is one of those rare budding ecologists that excels both outside in the field and inside analyzing data and modeling. And on top of all that, she's also an amazing artist. So you'll see a lot of her original drawings throughout her presentation, and several pieces of art that decorate the plant lab. And she is also a figure skater, which I think really speaks to how she can do it all. I wasn't sure where to put that in the introduction. So she'll be putting most, if not all, of those strengths to good use as she starts a PhD at Michigan State University this fall. And with that, I'll turn over to Jenna.
Thank you, Erin, for that great introduction. And yeah, thank you all for showing up both here and online, and being interested in learning about the work I've done throughout my time here at Archbold. So excited to share. So my project works on something that I am banking on, and that is seed bank predation a driver of plant population dynamics? So to start, I'm starting off with something very simple, very well understood and studied, and that is fire shapes plant population demographics. In one way is very obvious, very direct, fire kills plants. In another way though, especially here, working in a very fire-adapted ecosystem, through killing especially dominant species, that creates openings for a lot of herbaceous species to grow and respond to. One example of this is Eryngium cuneiform. We do long-term demography in the plant lab on the species, and there's a lot of data that supports this. But recruitment has been shown to be the highest even within the first year post-fire. What happens later, though, is a little more questionable. So after this big peak in recruitment, over time, populations gradually decrease since they are fire adapted and rely on that gap opening. But as you can see, there's quite a bit of variability. So on the left is Eryngium cuneiform. Population size is fluctuating over time. On the right is Hypericum cumulicula. This is more population rate, growth rate. As you can see, a lot of variance in this figure. So this might explain why in areas in the scrub, we'll encounter big gaps and not a lot of plants. Even long after a fire, not much disturbance, and you would expect plants to thrive. That leads me into knowledge gaps in demography. So if you're familiar with the work of the plant lab, we do a very good job at tracking plant populations over time, even individual species. But this work is targeted at different levels above ground. What it does miss, though, is this big, huge gap between reproductive individuals and new seedlings. And this gap, there's a lot that can go on between these two stages. For example, right from the start, not all seeds that are reproductive individual make it right away to a seedling. From the plant, not all seeds are viable. Additionally, the seed has to make it in the ground first in an adequate spot in order to grow. So dispersal and even seed removal play a role. And lastly, to complicate things even more, say a seed ends up in the seed bank successfully and it's viable, it has the potential to grow. But the conditions have to be right in order for it to germinate. And also, I guess luckily, dormancy, or plants can become dormancy, or sorry, plants have adopted dormancy as an ability to just wait out until the right conditions happen. However, dormancy is a timer, and this timer can easily run out. And I feel like a lot of work in filling this gap between reproductive individuals and seedlings is like focused on seed viability, seeing what triggers germination. For me, I'm gonna take it a step further and make it a little more complicated and focusing on this issue on how above ground dynamics affect the number that's below ground. So to start, before introducing any type of hypotheses here, I want us all to be on the same page. And note that what I'm going to show you next, there are a bunch of visuals. These are all assumptions. They're based off of my knowledge in literature or the majority of what literature says, and also my knowledge from here. Also, too, community ecology in general is quite complex. It depends on a lot of abiotic and biotic factors. Even animal behavior plays a role here. So to start, imagine an area that has been recently burned between 0 and 5 years post-burn. This is when we see that surge in seedling recruitment. And in terms of predation, if seeds exist, I would expect a lot of the predation pressure to come from invertebrates, largely because they come in a lot of large community sizes and they live below ground. And from my understanding, fires here don't penetrate the surface very deep, so they would remain largely unaffected, or the effect on them is very low. On the other hand, for vertebrates, I would expect very little predation, if any, just because they are more mobile, they can escape when a fire happens. If they're above ground dwelling, then they might just not survive. Now, fast forwarding in the future a little bit more, I gave the range about 6 to 10 years, and a lot of herbaceous plants. This is like pretty peak population growth happening. I would expect even more predation coming from invertebrates, just since fire is a big disturbance, by now I would feel like colony sizes would reestablish. Furthermore, I would expect a little more predation from larger vertebrates at this time, just because dominant shrubs will grow back and they would utilize these shrubs for habitat. Another note too, the seeds I'm studying are quite small. So the vertebrates predating on these seeds are quite small too, and being exposed out in the open risk their own predation. Lastly, 11 plus years, a lot of the dominant shrubs are fully grown. Maybe the herbaceous communities are starting to die off a little bit, but seeds still exist. I would expect the predation pressure to fall more on the vertebrates. I expect vertebrate diversity to increase as there's bigger plants, maybe more different plants, more diverse plants that would attract a lot of different potential predators. On the other hand, I would expect invertebrate predation to decrease a little bit, as given the size differences and behavior, vertebrates would predate on seeds at a much quicker rate, just depriving the invertebrates for seeds. Also too, with the potential for vertebrate diversity to increase, there's always a chance that they might just predate on the invertebrates too, thus decreasing their predation pressure. Now, hypothesis time. So number one, I expect that seed predation will increase with time since fire. This relates to just overall that fire is a disturbance. Community sizes might decrease over time. There's vegetation that grows, more predators that would utilize that vegetation too, and overall grow in community size. Secondly, I believe that predation rates will be higher under shrubs than gaps. So again, these predators tend to be small. Being out in the open is risks their own predation. So if there's seeds that exist next to larger shrubs, I find it more likely that they would be utilizing them. Lastly, I believe that seed predator diversity will increase with time since fire. This relates to my point that invertebrates might be leading the predation from the beginning, and over time, vertebrates will come in and predate as well. This also could be measured by just like seed selection too. Say, like in the beginning, species-specific relationships will happen. Over time, if there's more diversity, there's more just generalist behavior, more different types of seeds will get consumed. So going into my methodology, branching off of that last point, I did not just select one seed type for the study, instead 5. Selecting one risks the potential for just any type of predator preferring any other seed around it. So 5 increases my chances. And I stared at these seeds quite a bit. So here's some drawings of what they look like. I also noticed too, they vary in size. So I put them in like a decreasing size range here. So this is to target more predators too. Also, if you're familiar with these seeds, maybe not too, but there's certain parts of the seeds I left on, and they're known as like sepals or receptacles. And I just left them out like this because I based what I saw majority of the seeds having to just leave out that way. I just figured most predators would encounter the seeds this way anyway. Jumping into site selection, as you probably know, based on every single fire map that has been made at Archbold, everywhere at Archbold is not burned all at the same time year after year. It is divided in burn units, and it creates a nice sense of biodiversity. So areas like this, very recently burned, can exist with areas like on the right or on the left, areas that have been long since burned. This also leads into site selection too, like specifically. And for my study, I selected rosemary bulbs, so defined by the presence of Serratiola ericoides or Florida rosemary, just to standardize things. I then deep dove into fire history. So I looked at the last time these bulbs have been burned and how intensely and how much the fire covered the burns. So I I standardized it in saying that, or I selected sites that have been very well burned. Here's some examples, some pictures of what some of these sites look like. Also notice like the unevenness of this time scale. I have a lot of sites towards the more recently burned side, and that is because of just the variance in what the rosemary looks like as it is growing. By this time, in like 15 years, it all just looks the same. And I just really wanted to capture the effects of growing vegetation on predation. Within each site, too, I selected rosemary for the habitat, the effect of shrubs on predation. I also selected gaps. So what made this pretty easy to like really see the effects of vegetation, rosemary is allelopathic. So it inhibits the growth of vegetation around it. And it creates a nice contrast of where a shrub exists and where there's less plants. Going even further into my methodology, I did deploy seeds out in petri dishes, out in the open for anything to access them. However, to really understand who is predating the seeds, I created different exclusion treatments. One of which is a vertebrate access or invertebrate exclusion. So these are covered in like sticky coating and elevated above the ground surface. Note too, I didn't include Hypericum cumulicula or Paradicea in this access treatment just because they are quite tiny and I did not expect any vertebrates to predate on these seeds. I would expect just to keep recovering the same amount of seeds every time. I also had access for invertebrates, so excluding anything big, nothing can get through this cage that's larger than the cage holes. And lastly, I have a closed access, which is all the exclusion treatments combined. This is not to judge predation, but rather get a sense of any kind of seed removal due to abiotic conditions, mainly wind here. Note too, this was just for reference. I did not include this in my analysis. It did not measure predation at all. And within each dish, I had one species, and each dish contained 5 species, or 50 seeds, and they were left out for 4 days. So here's everything all together. I kept all 5 or 3 for the exclusion, the vertebrate access treatment all together. Notice that exclusion treatments weren't spaced too far apart, just in case there were nests around. And also basing off of the smaller rosemary, I didn't want to separate the dishes too far from it to just not see the effects of that plant. So this was just a standard protocol, keeping everything within a 1 meter radius. So yeah, in the end, I counted a lot of seeds. Initially 36,100 for setup, recovered 32,321, so well over 68,000. Not only did I see seeds get removed, I also saw some that were damaged, and here's pretty cool pictures of them with the 3 species that I put in the vertebrate access treatment. And before I get to results, I just want to go over terminology. I know I threw like all these access and exclusion treatments or whatever to you. I don't want you to work your brain for this. So I just focused my results on what is predating on the seeds. So one of which is invertebrate removal. Picture ants here just carrying away full seeds. I also have invertebrate damage. So anything that would stay and just munch on the seeds. And lastly, I have vertebrate removal. So obviously any larger vertebrate would just consume whole seeds. Overall, I found that predation does increase with time since fire in some species. These results for this part show the open access treatment to me the most accurate because it has the less barriers for all predators. So for this species, Eryngium cuneiformium, I saw this relationship only in rosemary, under rosemary. To me, this gives me a sense that whatever predator is predating on Eryngium is utilizing growing vegetation over time. For Lechia cernua, I just saw this straightforward increase of predation with time since fire, regardless of habitat, and same goes for Lechia decurtii. I also found in some species that invertebrate predation is higher under rosemary. For Hypericum cumulicula, this relationship is quite outstanding to me. There's quite a big difference between the 2 treatments. For Lechia decurtii, I found a significant difference in the invertebrate damage and predation in open treatments, and with higher rates in rosemary over gaps. Overall, though, with vertebrate predation, so I lumped all these 3 species together and looked at the removal over time since fire by vertebrate, like through the vertebrate axis, and found this very large decrease. Also branching off of that, why I lumped them together, as you could see, vertebrate predation was relatively the same across species. Also too, I found kind of species preferences in the predators. So as you can see with this figure, Leccia cernua and Leccia decurtii are much more preferred by insects than Aryngium cuneiform. And only for Leccia cernua, this difference in vertebrate predation and insect predation is significant. So this is kind of a bonus result. So the exclusion treatments I put out were meant for just gauging guilds, different sizes of predators, not really identifying them. I didn't want to be staring at my seeds like 24/7 to judge that. But along the way, I just happened to make little extra observations, and I had a lot of possible predators that I captured, gave to Mark to identify. These were insects. Out of all of them, there's two I feel pretty confident about, one of which is Peduli angionoi, eating Hypericum cumulicula. And these guys are fast acting. At one site, within like an hour and a half after deployment, they were just consuming all these seeds, like pretty much like completely gone. And also I revisited my sites like after 2 days of deployment just to check up on things, see if anything is disturbed, and then also like having that time to look at potential predators. And yeah, most of the time within 2 days, the Hypericum was just completely consumed and predated on. Another predator is the Florida harvester ants, as you might have in mind if you're familiar with them, predating on some of the bigger seeds here. I observed it at one site directly carrying Leccia cernua, and there were a set of dishes at one site with like really high removal, and this guy was around. Going into just next steps and implications of my study, I am collaborating with Josh Fowler, who's a former postdoc at the University of Miami. He's postdocing in Colorado now. And he's developed a lot of population models on a lot of the species the plant lab does long-term demography on. So he utilizes long-term demography data to model. He looked at effects of time since fire on population dynamics. His big interest is soil microbes. As for me, I would include just percentages of seed mortality, seeing just tying my results into his model and really scaling up to see the effects of my predation rates on overall populations. So again, revisiting my hypotheses, I found for some species, seed predation does increase with time since fire. Given that these species are more preferable to invertebrates, I believe that invertebrates are driving this predation across time since fire. Furthermore, I found for some species, predation was higher under rosemary or dominant shrubs. These two, Leccia decurtii and Hypericum cumulicula, this happened despite time since fire, or regardless of time since fire, while Aryngium cuneiform had this relationship of growing rosemary, increasing as it's growing. Furthermore, I think there's a very special relationship between Hypericum cumulicula and Bedoles. It might be specific to rosemary, I don't really know. That's just kind of what my study showed. But at least this relationship, though, I think requires further investigation. I think it has a very significant impact on Hypericum cumulicula population dynamics. Lastly, with seed predator diversity increasing with time since fire, I don't have much data to support this, especially as I saw a big sharp decline in vertebrate predation over time since fire. But with invertebrate predation, maybe, since these three species are heavily preferred by invertebrates and predation is increasing over time, this could happen with invertebrate diversity. I I don't really know all the predators attacking the seeds, only just 2. And with Fidoles, it seems to just target rosemary regardless of fire, so we'll see. So in the end, predation can definitely contribute to post-fire population dynamics. I found that anytime after a fire, the threat of predation exists. And predator behavior is definitely influenced by habitat features. And overall, for my study species, I found that invertebrates are a main driver of population decline. And yeah, with that, I would like to thank everybody who's helped me and supported me along the way. I learned so much from the plant lab. And yeah, thank you for my time here.
Crazy amount of seeds that you have.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear more about your methodology of actually counting the seeds. Like, what was the highest number that you ever counted to individually?
I mean, every time I deployed seeds in dishes, I had them at sets of 50, but to count to 50, I grouped them in groups of 10. So I guess 10 is the highest.
Non-study related, but where did you get the I Love Native Plant shirts?
Oh, at the Florida Native Plant Society conference.
Yeah.
They are cute.
The species you chose, do you know if they are like forming a permanent seed bank or transient seed bank?
Ooh, that's a good question. I do not know. Permanent. I was like thinking that, but I was like, what program did you use for illustrations? I actually just like zoomed in on PowerPoint and like my laptop was touchscreen, so I just like doodled with my finger.
What influenced your choice of checking on the seeds after 4 days?
Yeah, I mean, I had some like trials before like my finalized trials, I guess. And I left them out for 3 days and I didn't see much predation going on. And then I wanted to leave them out for a lot longer, but that also risked like them getting rained on. So I just added an extra day eventually, but I would have loved to have them out for longer just to see more predation over time.
The Fedoli relationship with Hypericum is really interesting. Are Fedolis, is it known that they really like Hypericum, or is this kind of really of a new observation?
I think to Mark, I wasn't entirely sure, but they are generally a seed predating species, so I think it is more well known. That's my sense. Oh boy.
Do you know more or less how long it takes after a fire for these plants to start producing seeds again?
Ooh, I think it's like that like middle range, like the 5 to 10 years, right?
Ikea will come out usually like the year after.
Oh,
It takes
yeah.
a lot. Hypericum usually wait a year or two before it starts producing.
Soon.
Probably, but then I think the other
Like the
ones.
bigger, yeah,
probably
that's
3 to maybe 2 to 4 years for the bigger
Oh.
ones. Just a guess.
yeah. Cause I was just like reading recently on like the bigger seeds, but a little later, right?
So you recovered a large amount of your seeds that you initially dispatched.
Yeah.
Were you expecting that, or were you expecting a lot more predation?
I was hoping for a lot more. But it could just be like the setup, the treatments, like just a behavioral response to the petri dishes, even time too. Like, I also wondered like since I visited each site halfway through, just like leaving my scent behind or like the disturbance I did could have affected predation rate.
Little changes too.
Yeah, seasonality also. I I didn't see this like when naturally the seeds were producing a lot of seeds. That's when I collected the seeds. But when I actually deployed them, there weren't many seeds around anyway.
Great job on your talk. It was really entertaining, and I have a kind of a natural history question that maybe I should, as a scientist here, already know. But are there studies that look at changes in seed production by the plants that you studied after fire, different periods after fire? So is it kind of a constant level of seed production for these plants, or does seed production change with time since fire? I know for saw palmetto, for example, doesn't get back to its like maximum seed productivity until like 10 years or so after fire. That's what I'm.
Yeah, I think like generally there's this like peak and then crash. Yeah, like the 5 to 10 year range of peak productivity.
I think per capita, probably not, but as a
Okay.
population, there's more seeds.
Yeah.
But I don't think quite like the soft palmetto.
Sorry to monopolize the question, but, so when you didn't recover a seed, you assume it was consumed. My question is related to ants in particular, which could typically bring that seed into their ant nest, where that seed could be actually in a better condition to germinate. So do you think it's necessarily consumption? I already have a weird, like, why do we use predate for seed? Predation of seed doesn't make sense to me. Removal.
Yeah, removal. I was saying seed predation just based off of like early conversations with Mark. He was saying a lot of the seeds around here don't have lysosomes or like lipid and protein rich like parts to them that a lot of plants have adapted to disperse seeds. Like the insects would predate on that part and then just like leave the rest of the seed behind and disperse the seed. So that's kind of the idea behind predation, but there's always a chance like the seeds could be left somewhere else and they could germinate from there.
So do you think that this has any implications for like conservation or like restoration? Like say you were trying to reintroduce one of these plants to a scrub. Do you think you should try to be excluding Vidoli or Pogo or whatever from taking away the seeds if you're trying to restore something?
I guess there's always a chance, yeah. Also too, like it's beyond the scope of my study, like how I referred to before is like a seasonality thing, like maybe, I mean, I know I experienced pretty low predation rates and maybe this is like the best time to put out seeds versus any other time because the seeds could more so enter the seed bank that way.
All right. Well, let's
I
get
got two things to say. Just comments that Franco said. And Victoria's online. You answered Victoria's questions already, but just wanted to say, great job, Jenna. Love the drawings.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.